I'm here because I am a roaring lion crying out righteousness. I've been doing Bible study and Bible teaching now, being a pastor for 40 years plus. And I have to tell you what I started teaching last time you and I were together, in addition to many other things that Proverbs chapter 3 has produced. There are probably, what I want to say today, are two new revelations of a person who has spanned the Bible teaching for 40 years. Some would call me a trained theologian. I did earn a master's degree at Union Theological Seminary here in New York City. And so I've been a pastor and substantial teacher of the Bible nearly every day. But I've discovered what I would want to refer to as two new revelations built in some basic knowledge that we've had previously. But this is a very exciting time. So I want you to pay very careful attention as I go through segment number 2 of For Your Ears and Blessings Only, because what I'm going to say to you is an elevated teaching for those who have qualified, have given themselves over to the fact that the laws of Moses are more enduring than planet Earth itself or that great ball of fire in the sky called the sun. That the laws of Moses, being the word of God, is more enduring, has a longer lifespan than the earth itself, and it is impervious to destruction. However, the one thing that Satan has done is now, in more recent modern times, has told people to neglect the law with a vast misinterpretation of a statement made by the Apostle Paul regarding the Gentiles being excluded from the law, but now being engulfed, being taken in by the law, by the blood of the Lord Jesus Christ. I'll get to that in a more definite way. But there are those of us who've gone ahead now and have accepted the laws of Moses. And I have to tell you that there are going to be two revelations. One is that I'm going to, if you will, show you how Solomon, who wrote Proverbs that we have been dancing on for the last 14 years, and Solomon, who wrote about favor, which is something Moses never really talked about, or Joshua or any of the prophets, but Solomon wrote about this thing called favor in the context where your enemies will bless you, where your enemies will bless you with the blessings of God. Now, please make note of that. Pay careful attention, those of you who make notes of what I teach. Make note of this, where your enemies will bless you with the enemies, with the blessings of God. That is favor. When your enemies come to you, and they bless you with God's blessing from your enemy's hands, that is favor at this utopian state. I'm going to be revealing that today if I get enough opportunity to get to it, and how Solomon does this. 500 years after the death and time of Solomon, that these words become fleshed out in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, and the book of Daniel, it's just a great revelation, especially for one who I consider myself pretty astute in teaching the word of God. I've been here for 40 years, and yet I'm discovering this tremendous power of favor where your enemies will bless you with the blessings of God. And so we're gonna read chapter 3 of Proverbs, written by Solomon. These words, I'm going to give a general dating. These words written by Solomon were written perhaps just about 1,000 years before the birth of the Lord Jesus Christ, or before what the historians on the secular worldly side called before the Christian era. Before the Common Era. These words I'm going to read to you now are roughly about 3,000 years old. But they have been preserved. And I can tell you this, my brother and my sister, that there are very few documents or words written by anybody that's at least 3,000 or more years old. We'll get back to that. We'll talk about Sanskrit, and we'll talk about some Chinese, Confucius, Hindu stuff. You don't want to get into all that nonsense today. We'll do that when we got some time to sit down at a desk in a classroom and a chalkboard. But these words were written about 3,000 years ago. And while there are several segments that Solomon points up who lived 3,000 years ago or 1,000 years before the Common Era, wrote this. He said, "My son, forget not my law," that's the law of God, "but let thine heart keep my commandments." This is one of the things he starts out right away, Solomon does, and you're going to be blessed. I pray I can explain this. I pray I can show you how these words 500 years later take perhaps the greatest life source. I mean, it's than any words of Moses or crossing the Red Sea. How these words I'm going to read to you now, 500 years later will rise up as this beauty and power in a tragic and a sad yet prophetic time. Lord Jesus Christ, help me to explain this to so many friends that are listening to me right now. So Solomon writes that the law of God will give you length of days. You'll live long. You'll have a long life, and you'll have peace. This is what the law of God will do to you. And he goes on to say, "Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck," which it gives undergirding to the law of God. "Write them on the table of thine heart." And this is the, if you will, title tune verse that we're going to focus on today. Now, so the law of God does a multitudinous number of great and wonderful and awesome things, but this is what we're going to focus on today, is favor. And this favor could be, you could get favor by favor. That means you are favorite, you are favored. People look upon you with an eye to bless you. People look upon you with an eye of delight. People look upon you with an eye of protection and advancement. But this favor that Solomon is writing about now, that's going to be demonstrated some 500 years later, is extraordinary. It's extraordinary. So Solomon writes, "So shalt thou find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and man." This key verse, where I'm not so busy with so many other things, I would sit down. I'd probably go out someplace like Phoenix, Arizona. There's a town out there, Phoenix, I get the name of it now. I'd go out to Arizona someplace, or maybe, I don't know, or someplace in Utah, and I would write. And I spent some time, I would write about how this magnificent event that took place in the life of Ezra and in the life of Nehemiah, where they found favor in the sight of God and of man, but prophesied. And we don't really think about Solomon so much as a prophet, but if I was talking so much here, this is extraordinary. This is a mighty confirmation of the word of God materialized some 500 years later, and in the most powerful, demonstrative way, I think, has been seen since the crossing of the Red Sea and the building of the temple of God by Solomon. After the temple of Solomon had been torn down and had existed the temple of Solomon had existed for some 300 to 400 years, maybe 500 years, then it was torn down, then rebuilt, because of this one word called favor. But the favor could not exist, could not be displayed towards Ezra and Nehemiah unless they kept the law of God. It was the very fact of the law of God, not their skin color, not their height, not their weight, not their agenda, not their intellect, it was the one thing that brought if you will, Niagara Falls rush of favor into the life of Ezra and Nehemiah, is that they kept the law. They kept the Sabbath. And if you don't mind, say they kept the first fruit offering and they kept the tithe as well. By the way, I just been dating this. Today is Ash Wednesday, in the event that somebody's interested. That's Catholic. I'm not really going to get into that very much. I mean, I do observe it. I understand it. The 40 days prior to the Pentecost and the celebration season, I understand all of that. And maybe I'll talk more about that in the Bible study later tonight. But this favor, well, let's get to it. I'll tell you what, let's do. All right, here's what I'm going to ask the engineer to take me, because this favor was poured out upon two people that kept the law in the face of adversity. You know what I thought was a beautiful teaching last time you and I were together is that I said that Daniel, who was carried away captive, he was just a boy, and he was carried away captive from his homeland in Judah to Babylon. He was offered a job as a counselor, something like Secretary of State or, one of the secretaries of the cabinet of Nebuchadnezzar. He turned it down. He was thrown in the lion's den for ultimately only praying and worshiping God. And Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego also were offered some very powerful positions as governors of some of the provinces of Persia and Babylon and the Medes. They turned it down and they were thrown into the fiery furnace. But this was early on. This was before Artaxerxes, this was before Darius, this is before Cyrus. And this was mainly during the period of Babylon or Belteshazzar, who had been the one who brought them away captive, and it was not for the purpose. What was offered to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as this prestigious position as governor, as counselors, was not to advance the kingdom of God, and it wasn't favor either. And we'll talk about that. There is so much packed into these three books of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. It is mind-boggling. But this favor thing, and I'm praying the Lord will give me, I'm hesitating a little bit about actually getting into the reading now, because I'm praying, Lord, help me to explain this, because I know what I know, but I pray what I know I can teach other people here today so they can understand this magnificent act of God some 400 years after the death of Solomon, of the prophecy that if you keep the law, you're going to get favor. All right, come on, Mr. Engineer, let's go to chapter 5 of the book of Ezra. And I'm going to be doing a lot of reading. I have to confess to you, I'm not the best reader. And I got a bad eye. My right eye is a bad eye. Some lesbian woman tried to punish me for what I believe about the Word of God. And I believe that LGBTQ is wrong. And she tried to punish me by taking away my sight. All right. So one of my eyes is bad, and the other one is not so good. And then even prior, when I had good eyes, I wasn't the best reader. I don't know why. I think I had this thing called dyslexia, where I get ahead of myself and my words turn around, and so I have to reorganize the words it's like reading left-handed. It's like reading Hebrew when you read from right to left. Anyway, so let's go and try this now. All right. Then the prophets, Haggai, the prophet, and Zedekiah, the son of Edu, prophesied unto the Jews that were in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel, even unto them. Then rose up Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua, the son of Jozadak, and began to build the house of God, which is at Jerusalem, and with them were the prophets of God helping them. Now, this is in the category of prior to Ezra returning. At the same time came to them Tatnai, governor on this side of the river, and Shealtiel and their companions, and said thus unto them, who have commanded you to build this house and to make up this wall? Now, Haggai and Zedekiah were prophets now in the returning process of the Jews. This other creep with this very long name, when they saw what was going on, came over there to instigate. Verse 4. Then said we unto them after this manner, what are the names of the men that make this building? But the eye of their God was upon the elders of the Jews, that they could not cause them to cease, till the matter came to Darius. Darius was the son of Artaxerxes. We'll get to that a little bit later on. And so the geographical the historical history of this is mind-boggling. Well, I'll get to that. And then they returned answer by letter concerning this matter. A copy of the letter that Tatnai, governor on this side of the river, and Shaltahbozenah and his companions, and Aspersacates, which were on the side of the river, sent unto Darius the king, and sent a letter unto wherein was written thus unto Darius the king, all peace. Be it known unto the king that we went into the province of Judah to the house of the great God, which is built with great stones, and timber is laid in the walls, and this work goeth fast on and prospereth in their hands. Now, they're writing letters back to Babylon that somebody's working on the house that Solomon had built some 400 years later. Then asked we the elders and said unto them, thus, who commanded you to build this house and to make up these walls? And we asked the name also to certify thee, that we might write the name of the men that were the chief of them. And thus they returned us answers, saying, we asked the servants of the God of heaven and earth, and build the house that was built these many years ago, which a great king of Israel built, which is Solomon, and set up. But after that our fathers had provoked the God of heaven unto wrath by not keeping the law, he gave them into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. So Darius is writing back, Artaxerxes of Darius is writing back to these creeps and giving them the answer of what they want, so the building can continue. He gave them into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, and the Chaldean, who destroyed this house and carried the people away into Babylon. Okay, we've gone over that. But in the first year of Cyrus, the king of Babylon, the same King Cyrus made a decree to build this house of God. So that's where the authority comes from. And check this. This is the beautiful part about favor. This is the thing, last time we were together, I mean, it's just a sure enough stomp down blessing. And listen to this. And all the vessels also of gold and silver of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took out of the temple that was in Jerusalem and brought them into the temple of Babylon, those did Cyrus the king take out of the temple of Babylon, and they were delivered unto me, whose name is Sheshbazzar, whom he had made governor, and said unto him, take these vessels. Now, just to pause there, Mr. Engineer, all the vessels that were taken out of the house of God in the Nebuchadnezzar war, the year 524 war, and were taken to Babylon and put in the temple of Babylon. They're now being taken out of the temple of Babylon, given to Ezra to come back. This is what I'm talking about when I say the favor that when your enemies, the people that had the Jews in captivity, gave them all the gold and silver that belonged to them to go back to the house of God, as Zerubbabel was now beginning to rebuild the house of God that had been destroyed some 400, 500 years earlier. You just don't get no better than that. When your enemies give you back everything that was taken from you, it just don't get no better than that. It just don't get no better than that. But it's the favor of God that's on Ezra. And it's because he keeps the law. And because God has entrusted to him all this gold and all this silver. Listen to me, my friends. My friends, please listen to me. God is entrusting to Ezra all of this gold and silver that was fashioned by the hand of Solomon 500 years before Ezra was born. Gold and silver shields that were 100 pounds heavy, 100 pounds of gold, that before Ezra was born, God is entrusting this extraordinary wealth of the wealthiest man on the planet. Solomon was the wealthiest man ever lived. Now God is giving that wealth to Ezra for one reason. For one reason. Ezra has demonstrated in the time that he was in captivity in the hands of the enemy, he kept the law of God. And what Ezra demonstrated what God saw in Ezra was that Ezra kept the law of God when he was barefoot, when he was poor, when he was hungry, when he was in prison. Ezra never stepped away from Sabbath worship. Ezra never stepped away from the tithe, from the first fruit offering. So when God saw that Ezra was faithful in keeping the law, he gave him the entire treasure that Solomon once had. Now, you have to think about this favor this way. All the money, all the treasure, all the gold that Solomon once had, God gives it to another man named Ezra to bring it back to the house of God. And let me just pull your coat to some of y'all out there who listen, but you're stubborn. Let me pull your coat. Do you think God would trust you with that much? God would trust you with the inheritance of Solomon, the wealthiest man on the planet, if he can't trust you with the tithe? If God can't trust you with the first fruit offering? If you fudge on that, or if you rebel on the first fruit offering, which is regarding money, if you rebel on the tithe, do you think that God would trust you with all that gold? Listen, God put in the hands of Ezra all the gold that Solomon ever owned. I mean, think about it for just a second. And where the favor comes in is that God causes the enemy of Ezra, Nebuchadnezzar, who tore down and burned down the temple, took away all the gold, to give it back to one man called Ezra. Talking about favor. And not because it was because Ezra kept the law. You have to wonder, will God trust you with anything at all? Not of anything of value, but will God trust you with anything if he can't trust you to keep the Sabbath, to do your own thing? See, if God gave you all that gold, you say, well, I'll give some of it to the temple, but I ain't gonna give no whole week's paycheck to the temple. I'm gonna keep some of this for myself. I'll give some of it to the temple, but I ain't gonna keep no Sabbath. I'll worship on Sunday. That's just as good. See, you see what I'm saying? You see, you look at your money and say, well, I ain't gonna give all this to God. I got to keep something for myself. I ain't gonna give all this to temple. Now hold tight to this lesson. Ezra gave every bit of Solomon's wealth. God gave every piece of gold, every piece of silver, every piece of shittim wood, every piece of cedar, every piece of badger skin dyed red, every piece of mohair, every piece of purple curtain. God gave every last bit of that train load to Ezra because he could trust Ezra to make sure it got to the house of God. Now, God gives some of y'all good paychecks, gives some of y'all, well, God don't give you, but you get good paychecks, but you don't make sure it gets to the house of God. But the better lesson, I think, because those of us who are already doing that, we don't have to be scolded about that, because we make sure what God gives us gets to the house of God, no delay. Gets to the house of God before we pay our rent, before we pay our car note. It gets to the house of God. We know that. But the blessing here is that it was Ezra's enemies that God used to give it. Imagine this. God told Joshua, he said, Moses, my servant, is dead. You're up now. You got to lead this group. But what I'm reading to you, my friend, is that all of the gold and all of the silver and all the precious things, all of the shittim wood, all of the cedar, all of the badger skin dyed red, all of the mohair, all of that once belonged to this great man called Solomon, God gave it back to one man called Ezra. And he gave it to Ezra because he could trust Ezra to make sure that all that tithe and all that first fruit offering got back to the house of God where it belonged. And here you are with a little old paycheck every week, and God can't trust you. And some of y'all with a monthly check from Social Security, and God can't trust you. You see? You see what I'm saying? So now, all right, Mr. Engineer, I'm going to take a break, right? Mr. Engineer, I want to take a break right here. I'm going to take a break, and I want you to, first of all, dwell on the things that we've said. This is, here, was it because Solomon prophesied that you shall find favor, that it commanded Darius and Cyrus and Artaxerxes to do as they did? You got a 500-year-old piece of gold that weighs 40 pounds. You got a drinking cup that weighs 7 pounds that can hold, I don't know, so much wine. And you got hundreds of them that Solomon had. When Solomon would invite people to dinner. And every last one of those pieces of gold and silver was given to one man, because God could trust him to make sure it got to the house of God. I'm going to be right back, everybody. Hold tight. Take a look at this, and I'll be right back.
What is one of your favorite meals that you have had here?
Burgers and fries.
The food's delicious.
The rice and the chicken and cornbread.
As it
The food is
should.
wonderful. You see it made in the kitchen. They have sandwiches, soups, waffles.
Everything.
Everything.
It's always gourmet breakfast made fresh every day. I personally love Sister Leah's eggs. It is amazing. I can't even begin to fathom the airy taste. Literally, guys, a couple days ago, I was by the kitchen and I was just, the eggs was just really good. It was really good. Really good.
Agree with that statement.
Really good.
What do you think about Pastor Manning? How do you like it?
I feel like Pastor is a very great man. He's honest, he's giving, and he likes to help the younger ones become future leaders.
Yes.
I feel like that's a great trait, because people nowadays, they don't really care about others. They care about themselves. They have the trait to care for somebody else, to listen to their problems and help them grow as another person. It's rare to find, and I feel like that's a great trait about him.
It isn't just about making bent legs straight. It's about enabling these children to re-enter society. Someday they can marry, they can get a job, they can work. It really, truly gives them their life back.
Their medical photos that we take kind of show it all. Their pre-op picture, none of them are smiling and they all look really scared. And then in their post-op picture, they have the biggest smiles on and they're so happy. I mean, it's only 2 pictures, but you can see that a journey has happened.
They never even dared to dream before, and now suddenly it's reality that they can dream and that these dreams could actually come true.
All right, so we're studying now from the book of Proverbs, chapter 3, focusing on verse 4, where Solomon writes that if you keep the law, you shall find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and man. And we're now focusing on the historical books of the Babylonian captivity and the returning Jews to Judah to rebuild the temple and to rebuild the wall. And the extraordinary favor that was bestowed upon Ezra. Now, we'll get to Nehemiah and some other segments, where Solomon was the wisest, richest man ever lived, and all the gold and silver he had in his house, all the gold and silver that was in the temple, all the other precious things such as shittim wood, cedar wood, badger skin dyed red, purple curtains, mohair curtains. All of that was taken back to the treasury in Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar. Trainloads of Solomon's wealth was taken back to Babylon and kept there. 500 years later, or 400 years later, Cyrus issues a decree that Ezra can now go back to, the Jews can now go back to Jerusalem, according to the prophecy of Jeremiah, to rebuild Jerusalem and Judah and the temple. And Cyrus gives to Ezra all of the wealth that once belonged to Solomon is now in the hand of one man called Ezra. It's called favor. The Babylonians didn't want to keep it because God had written on the wall, many tekel during the days of Nebuchadnezzar. And many tekel, rather. And so they just put that stuff in the storage in the temple in Babylon, which is a false god temple, and then nobody touched it, nobody stole it, everybody was scared of it because they knew it belonged to God, it belonged to Solomon. So God trusts one man called Ezra with the entire wealth of Solomon because he knew that Ezra would get all of that, would not take anything for himself, that Ezra would bring all of that gold and all that silver and all those precious things back to the house of God where it belongs. And so we're making a sub-story out of this, a sub-event out of this about how God can't even trust you with the tithe. You won't even bring the tithe to the God, so God doesn't trust you. But it's the fact that the law of God that Ezra kept, even in the time when he was barefoot and ragged and imprisoned, he kept the law of God. As a result of that, God knew that he could trust him. Let's go back to Ezra chapter 5, Mr. Engineer, and back to verse 15. Is it? Let's back up to 14 just 1 second. See if I want to read that again. Listen to that. Now watch this, everybody. And the vessels also of gold and silver of the house of God, that's Solomon. Read this way, all the vessels of gold, all of Solomon's vessels of gold, all of Solomon's vessels of silver, all of that which had been of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took out of the temple that was in Jerusalem and brought them into the temple of Babylon. Those did Cyrus the king take out of the temple of Babylon, and they were delivered unto one man, whose name was Shabbassar, whom also was made governor, which is Ezra. And unto him said, take these vessels, go, carry them into the temple that is in Jerusalem, and let the house of God be built in his place. And then came the same Sheshbazzar and laid the foundation of the house of God, which is in Jerusalem. And since that time until now hath it been in building, and yet is not finished. Now therefore, it seemed good to the king to let the search be made in the king's treasure, which is there in Babylon, where it be so that a decree be made of Cyrus, the king, to build this house of God at Jerusalem, and let the king send his pleasure to us concerning this matter. Next verse, next chapter. So this is a fascinating historical event, and probably one that doesn't get a lot of attention because mainly the false prophets don't understand it. The false prophets don't preach this because it challenges them. They don't preach anything that challenges the fact. It's hard for them to preach about the power of the law if they themselves don't keep the Sabbath. See, this is a magnificent, this is probably one of the best prosperity teachers the whole world has ever heard, that one man shall be given all the wealth of Solomon because he keeps the Sabbath. He keeps the tithe. He keeps the first fruit offering. Well, the prosperity preacher, the Joe Osteens in that crowd and the Rick Warrens of the world, they're not going to preach this. They can't preach it because glaring, underneath, the reason why this favor was given to Ezra is because he kept the law. Well, they don't keep the law. Osteen don't keep the law. And, these other preachers, they don't, Kenneth Copeland, they don't keep the law. So therefore they have to skip. But these chapters, if you're following me, I don't know how deep you've been into the books of Ezra and Nehemiah and times gone by in your early teachings of the Bible, but these are fascinating books, but the reason why they don't go down this road is because they themselves, so Joel Osteen can't stand up and preach this because he himself don't do it. And the moment he started talking about this happened because he kept the law, that would condemn him. Everybody would get up and walk out of that place out there he's got. Same thing with Kenneth Copeland or Rick Warren or with Jakes. People would get up and say, well, you're preaching something you don't do yourself. So they stay away from these kind of books. They stay and hang around the verses about, that doesn't condemn them. And that's why a lot of people want to get rid of the law because the Old Testament, because it condemns them. All right, let's go into Ezra number 6. And then Darius, the king, made a decree. And search was made in the house of the Rose, where the treasures were laid up in Babylon. And there was found at Akmeta in the palace that is in the province of the Medes. Now, you have to, Babylon had a major province called Medes and a major province called Persia, which, why we get these, if you will, Darius and Cyrus and Artaxerxes and Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. We'll go through that a little bit later when we try to divide up the provinces of Babylon, which contain 2 other major metropolis areas, one called Persia, a province of Persia, and the other province of Medes. So now we've gotten completely out of the temple of Babylon, so we're going to find in the temples of the Medes a roll, and therein was a record thus written. And in the first year of Cyrus the king, the same Cyrus the king made a decree concerning the house of God at Jerusalem. Let the house be built. Let the house be built. Now this is the favor of God. And many say that God anointed Cyrus. We'll discuss that a little bit later. But this is favor. Let the house be built, the place where they offered sacrifices, and let the foundations thereof be strongly laid. The height thereof, 60 cubits, that's 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof, 60 cubits. We'll talk about that as well when we get in a little more detailed study. With these 3 rows of great stones and a row of new timber. Cyrus writes about building God. Cyrus is not a Jew. He's a Babylonian. He's a Persian. But the favor of God on Ezra, God's causing this man to do all these things. To this one man called Ezra because he kept the law. God is in control. He's in control. He sits high and looks low. Anyway. And with 3 rows of great stones and a row of new timber, and let the expenses be given out of the king's house. Cyrus said, I'll pay for it. And also let the golden and silver vessels of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took forth out of the temple, which is at Jerusalem, be brought unto Babylon, be restored. Which brought again unto the temple, which is at Jerusalem, even one to his place, and placed them in the house of God. This is awesome. I pray y'all catching the drift here. Now, therefore, let Tatniah, governor beyond the river, and Shethas, Bosniah, and your companions, the Aspersakites, which are beyond the river, be yet far from thence. Let the work of the house of God alone. Don't listen, all y'all kings beyond the river, you little jealous, little puny kings, you're sitting in your little old kingdom, you think you're something, you're sitting on your throne. Listen, when I send the Jews back through your country, and because you know what's going on, they're rebuilding the house of God, don't you mess with them. Don't you mess with them, you little old tiny funny name kings. Don't you mess with Ezra, because they're going to rebuild the house of God. Let the work be done. Let the governor of the Jews and the elders of the Jews build the house of God in his place. This is favor beyond belief. Moreover, Cyrus says, I make a decree that ye shall do to the elders of these Jews for the building of the house of God, that of the king's good, even of the tribute beyond. In other words, y'all give them something too. Good God Almighty. Woo! Cyrus is saying to these little straw kings, they ain't about much. They got a little small kingdom. Ain't nothing really going on. They ain't got nothing, but they raising sand because they see this house going up. Somebody building a house over there in Jerusalem for the house of God. They'd heard about it 500 years earlier. They wondered, this going to cause them to lose their kingdom. So Cyrus writes a note and said, not only y'all better not mess with them, but when they come through, y'all give them something too. It don't get no better. Now, I read it for you. Watch this. Moreover, Cyrus said, I make a decree. What we shall do to the elders, ye shall do to the elders of these Jews for the building of this house of God. Talking about favor. And by the way, Solomon wrote this. Now his temple, his work is being revisited. It don't get no better than this in Bible teaching. I'm telling you, it don't get no better than this. 500 years after Solomon wrote that if you keep the law, that there'll be favor, his temple was torn down because the Jews failed to keep the law, and now God is causing Cyrus to write a decree to rebuild the temple and to restore all the gold and all the vessels. Favor! So Cyrus writes to these little tin-pot kings, when Ezra passed through you give him something too. You give him some gold. You give him this. I'll start over. Moreover, I make a decree that ye shall do to these elders of the Jews for the building of this house of God, that of the king's goods, even of the tribute beyond the river, forthwith expenses be given unto them, these men, that ye be not hindered. I'm sorry, that they be not hindered. So you give them something, don't mess with them. Now, this is God at his best. You got Solomon's prophecy coming to life. His temple torn down, but it's being restored again because of the law, the keepers of the law, Ezra and Nehemiah. And then you got God at his best using the enemies of God and making the enemies of God bow down and favor the keepers of the law of God. This is God at his best. This is God at his best. I mean, when they first came into Jerusalem and took down Jericho, okay, all right, that's big story. Wall came down, all that good stuff. But this is God at his best. This is God talking to talk. This is kind of God I like to talk about. This is God talking to talk. God saying, listen, they're going to rebuild it because they keep my law. And don't you try to stop them. In fact, you give them something, you give them of your gold and your silver. All of Solomon's wealth is being restored, all of it being restored. But when they pass through your little old county, your little old tin-pot county, the little tin-pot town where you think you're some kind of king, make sure you give them something too. Lord have mercy. It don't get no better than this. I tell you right now, it just don't get no better than this. It don't get no better than this. Verse 9. And they which have need of both young bullocks, in other words, and rams and lambs for the burnt offerings of the God of heaven, wheat, salt, wine, and oil, according to the appointment of the priests which are at Jerusalem, let it be given them day by day without fail. Lord have mercy. It don't get no better than this. I'm telling you, it just don't. It don't get no better than this. While they're passing through your land, if they want to keep the Passover, if they want to keep the holy days, if they need lambs and bullocks for burnt offering, if they need salt, if they need wheat, if they need oil, and they're in your land, give it to them. Do it every day that they need it. As long as they're in your, this is God at it. I call this the mafia God. Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy. Give it to them day by day. It don't get no better than this, my friend. Talking about favor. Now, all of this is happening because of verse 4. verse 1 of Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 4. Without Solomon having issued 400 years earlier, Proverbs chapter 3, verse 1 and verse 4, none of this will be happening. None of this. So it's the prophecy and it's the feedback, it's the re-blessing, it's the authentication, it's the vindication of Solomon. Though God let that temple be burnt down and torn down and all the gold and silver and all those precious things taken back to Babylon, because the Jews at the time didn't want to keep the Sabbath, didn't want to keep the laws. Now God's saying, I found a man or a few men, Ezra and Nehemiah, that do, and I'm going to restore everything that was taken by Babylon, by Nebuchadnezzar, every last bit of it going back. And by the way, while they're on their way back, you little old 10-pot kings think y'all something. You ain't nothing. You ain't never been nothing. You ain't going to never be nothing. But I want to make sure if they need lambs, if they want to hold a sacrifice in your country, because they got a long walk taking all this stuff back. If they want to hold a sacrifice and they need lambs, bullocks, and rams, give them to them. Give them to them. Call this the mafia God. Yeah. I don't know if that works too good, but anyway, sounds good right now. Verse 10, that they may offer sacrifices of sweet savor unto the God of heaven and pray for the life of the king and of his sons. Also, Cyrus says, I made a decree that whosoever shall alter this word. Now watch, this is the thing. I taught this many years ago. Some of y'all might remember, because I went through the book of it. I've taught these books before. I've done them several times. But this verse I like because it kind of talks the mafia talk I like. It says, also I made a decree that if there's anybody that tries to alter, tries to hurt the people, and don't give them what I said give to Ezra and Nehemiah, or try to make sure that they don't have lambs or bullocks to sacrifice, or try to, impede their way on their way, let timber be pulled down from his house. Let timber be pulled down from his house, and being set up, let him be hanged by the temple, Lord. This is showing up God. This is mafia God. I just got to go ahead and say it. I know what y'all think about the mafia, the dons and all that, but this is the mafia God. God said, listen, anybody who messes with Ezra and Nehemiah, pull the timber down out of his house and make a gallows and hang that lowlife. Hang him with the timber from his own house. That'll get the word out. That'll get everybody else in line. Let timber be pulled down from his house, and being set up, let him be hanged thereon, and let his house be made a dunghill. Well, if you don't know what dung is, some people call it feces. Some people call it another 4-letter word I'm not permitted to speak. But let it become a feces hill for what he has done, trying to hinder my people. This is the kind of God I want to serve. This kind of God I want. I got to stop here today. There's more. I told you when I first drove up with this series of teaching out of Proverbs chapter 3, verse 4, that's going to take a little time to get through all of this. But the favor, this is for your ears and your eyes only, because your ears and your blessings only, because they're going to people hear me right now. There are people that listen to me right now, about 100, so maybe about 1,000, and they're not going to cross over. They're going to keep on worshiping on Sunday. They're going to refuse to send an offering to this ministry. They're going to refuse the tithe. They're going to refuse the first fruit offering. They're going to keep on doing it. So this isn't for them. It's for your ears and your blessings only. I'm James David Manning, everybody. This is an exciting time. It's a very exciting time in which we now find ourselves. I will return with more of this teaching. This is a very exciting part of teaching. I'm excited to be, and I'm so excited that some of y'all are drinking these words, eating these words, and drinking the wine of these beautiful words of the God that that sends all that trusts one man with all of Solomon. I mean, you can see Ezra was a Solomon Jr.